I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The state banquet was supposed to project unity, control, and royal confidence. Instead, one piece of jewelry brought the entire evening to a sudden halt. Prince William had barely taken his place when his attention fixed on Queen Camilla's wrist, and his expression changed instantly. Around them, conversation continued for only seconds. Then William moved. What he believed he was seeing was unmistakable. A bracelet he associated not with Camilla, but with Diana. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not react like a man noticing an ordinary royal accessory. He stared, went still, and then rose from his place with the kind of controlled anger Catherine knew too well. A state banquet, one of the monarchy's most formal dinners for important national or foreign guests, is planned down to the smallest detail. Seating, jewelry, speeches, timing, entrances, and even the order of ceremonial moments are carefully managed. That was exactly why the bracelet mattered. Something so emotionally charged should not have appeared by accident. Catherine watched her husband's face harden and quietly said his name, hoping to slow him before the room understood what was happening. He barely seemed to hear her. William was already moving toward Camilla, while the queen consort remained seated for several tense seconds. She had spent the evening composed, but now her posture changed. Her hand moved over the bracelet almost instinctively, covering it as the prince approached. That gesture changed everything. William had already believed the piece was connected to Diana. Now he saw Camilla protecting it, before he had even said a word. To him, that looked less like confusion and more like recognition. A senior palace aide nearby seemed to understand the same thing. The official stopped mid-step, glanced toward the queen consort's wrist, and then toward the prince, clearly aware that this was not supposed to be happening. William reached the center of the room before anyone could intercept him. His voice was low, but the command carried. Stop the banquet. The nearest official hesitated for only a moment. Then the music stopped before the next ceremonial movement could begin. Conversations died almost immediately. Camilla remained where she was, her hand still near the bracelet, while Catherine stood several steps behind her husband, caught between concern and disbelief. William did not shout. That made the moment heavier. He looked directly at the queen consort and asked where she had obtained it. Camilla did not answer immediately, and that silence pushed his anger even further. Diana's engagement bracelet was not just jewelry to him. It represented memory, family, and a line he believed no one inside the palace had the right to cross. The banquet had been halted, but the real confrontation had only just begun. And as the doors closed on the interrupted evening, William was no longer asking why Camilla wore the bracelet. He wanted to know who had allowed her to possess it. To everyone else in that room, the bracelet was an object. To William, it carried a name, a memory, and a loss that had followed him since childhood. For Camilla, its meaning was more dangerous still, because anything connected to Diana existed inside one of the monarchy's most sensitive emotional fault lines. And standing between them was Charles, forced to confront a collision between the woman beside him and the son who had never forgotten his mother. William stepped away from the interrupted banquet with Catherine beside him, but his anger had already changed into something heavier. Diana's personal jewelry was not the same as a crown jewel, a ceremonial piece owned and used by the monarchy for official occasions. These were intimate objects, tied to a mother he had lost young, possessions that carried private meaning rather than public duty. That was why seeing the bracelet on Camilla's wrist felt so personal. It was not simply about who wore it. It was about who had been allowed to cross a boundary he believed everyone understood. Catherine watched him carefully as they entered a quieter room. She remembered hearing him describe the bracelet years earlier, including small details that made his certainty impossible to dismiss. William lowered his voice and told her that this did not feel like an innocent mistake. To him, someone had made a choice. Someone had taken something connected to Diana and placed it directly into the hands of the one person whose history made that decision explosive. Charles received the first account from a senior aide and said nothing for several seconds. As king, he carried authority over the royal household, meaning the staff, offices, and private systems that support the sovereign and family. But as a husband and father, the problem was far more painful. If he defended Camilla immediately, William might believe he was once again protecting his wife at the expense of Diana's memory. If he challenged her, he risked humiliating the woman standing beside him. Camilla insisted privately that she had never asked for Diana's bracelet. In a recorded conversation preserved in the palace's internal account of the evening, she said the piece had been presented to her from a palace collection as part of the banquet preparations. She claimed she had not deliberately chosen anything belonging to Diana. Yet even as she defended herself, she knew William would not accept the explanation without answers. Charles finally entered the room where his son was waiting. William did not greet him. He did not soften the question. "Did you know she had it?" The king stopped. That hesitation told William more than an immediate denial ever could. Catherine saw his expression change again, because now the problem stretched beyond Camilla. Months earlier, another quiet exchange inside Windsor had already placed this bracelet at the center of a warning nobody had fully resolved. And the moment William remembered that closed room, he understood the banquet had not created this crisis. It had merely exposed it. Months before the banquet, there had been another room, another piece of jewelry, and another moment William could not shake. It happened without cameras, without ceremony, and with only a handful of people aware that Diana's remaining personal effects were being reviewed. What looked like ordinary royal housekeeping became something far more consequential when one velvet case was moved from a private family inventory. That small decision became the trigger everyone would later trace back to the night the banquet stopped. William had always treated Diana's private possessions differently from ceremonial royal jewelry. Those personal effects were intimate belongings, connected to her life, rather than pieces routinely used for official duties, which made their emotional ownership especially sensitive for both him and Harry. Palace inventories, the internal records used to track where royal and family items are stored, can include older pieces whose status is not always immediately clear. That uncertainty created the opening for a mistake, or, as William later feared, something more deliberate. Camilla was already speaking with a royal collections aide when William unexpectedly entered the Windsor Review. The Queen Consort had been shown an unassigned bracelet and asked whether it could be made available for a future formal event. She had been told its classification was uncertain. Then the prince saw it. His reaction was instant. He stepped toward the table and identified the piece as Diana's engagement bracelet, leaving no doubt about what he believed had just been uncovered. William asked for the bracelet to be returned immediately to the private family case. Camilla did not retreat from the discussion. She told him she had not requested anything connected to Diana, and had simply responded to a piece presented as unassigned. But the future king was not interested in administrative language. To him, the emotional meaning came first. He personally closed the velvet case, pushed it back toward the aide, and watched it disappear beneath the inventory cloth. Charles tried to calm the situation later that day. In a documented private account of their conversation, the king urged his son not to turn a classification dispute into a larger family crisis. William heard something very different. He heard his mother's possessions being reduced to paperwork, labels, and storage categories. He left Windsor with the feeling that everyone understood the rules except the people responsible for enforcing them. Catherine remembered exactly what he told her afterward. In their private conversation, William said, "If that piece appears again, then someone made a choice." She never forgot the sentence, because there was no anger in his voice then, only certainty. The bracelet was supposedly returned to secured storage after that Windsor encounter. That fact changed everything now. Its appearance on Camilla's wrist at the state banquet could no longer be explained as a simple continuation of an unresolved review. William remembered the closed case. He remembered Charles asking for restraint, and he remembered his own warning. Now the bracelet had appeared again. The memory of that Windsor handover followed him back into the palace corridor, where restraint was about to give way to confrontation. There were no speeches now, no diplomatic smiles, and no ceremonial music to soften what came next. William entered the private receiving room with one question, but the moment he saw the bracelet still on Camilla's wrist, the question disappeared. His anger became personal. Camilla rose to face him. Charles stood several feet away, caught between them. And then William said the words that transformed a halted banquet into a family reckoning. "Take it off." Charles moved first. He ordered the attendants outside and shut the confrontation away from the banquet guests. A private receiving room is simply a smaller palace space used for controlled conversations away from the main ceremonial areas. And tonight, it became the place where royal restraint finally broke. The king wanted privacy because one careless sentence could turn a family wound into a public crisis. William wanted something else. He wanted the bracelet gone. Camilla refused to react like someone caught stealing. She told the prince she would not remove it simply to satisfy an accusation she believed was unfair. William immediately reminded her of Windsor. She had been there when he identified the same bracelet, watched him close the velvet case, and heard him insist that it belonged with Diana's private possessions. To him, that memory destroyed any claim that she could wear it without understanding the consequences. Camilla's anger finally surfaced. She told William that she would not spend the rest of her life treating every object connected to Diana as evidence against her. The queen consort had lived for years under comparisons she could never fully escape, and now she felt the bracelet had become another trial of her place inside the family. But the future king did not soften. He told her this was not about comparison. It was about a boundary. Camilla then gave the detail that changed the argument. In a documented account of the private exchange, she said the bracelet had been delivered to her dressing room that afternoon, with authorization already attached. She had not entered storage. She had not personally ordered its release. Someone inside the royal household had approved it before it ever reached her. William turned immediately toward Charles. Who authorized it? The king had no quick answer. Camilla slowly unclasped the bracelet and placed it on the table between them. "There," she said, "but that does not make your accusation true." William did not touch it. He stared at the piece for several seconds, then looked directly at his father. The banquet, he said, would not restart until they knew exactly how something supposedly secured after Windsor had left storage and reached Camilla's dressing room. Charles understood what had just happened. The question was no longer whether his wife should have worn Diana's bracelet. Someone within his own household had made that possible. And with the bracelet lying between them, the king now had to decide whether protecting Camilla mattered more than confronting the system that had placed it on her wrist. Charles had spent years mastering the royal instinct to contain a crisis before it escaped the room. But this crisis involved his son, his wife, and the memory of Diana all at once. Whatever he decided would wound someone. He studied the bracelet, listened to William's demand, and watched Camilla's anger harden into silence. Then the king stopped trying to save the banquet. His priority changed. He ordered the jewelry records brought to him immediately. Charles knew the authority now rested with him. As sovereign and head of the royal household, he could suspend the event, question staff, and order an internal review of how the bracelet had been released. That mattered because the argument had moved beyond ownership. If a restricted family object could leave storage without clear permission, then trust inside the palace itself had failed. William understood that. Camilla did too. Charles turned to his wife and told her quietly that he could not dismiss William's objection. Camilla heard the words as something harsher. To her, the king was choosing Diana's memory over her dignity, in the very room where she had already been challenged. She reminded him that the bracelet had been delivered to her with approval attached. He did not dispute that, but he told her the system that allowed it had to be confronted. William stayed silent until Charles admitted something he had avoided since Windsor. He should have settled the bracelet question when his son first raised it. The prince did not look victorious. He looked disappointed. That response cut deeper because it told the king that this was no longer about proving someone wrong. It was about a warning that had been ignored. The records arrived minutes later. Charles opened the jewelry log, the official internal record used to track where pieces are stored, moved, or assigned. One entry changed the tone immediately. The bracelet had not been released under Camilla's personal request. It had been removed under a general authorization connected to banquet preparations. William looked toward her. For the first time that night, part of the accusation weakened. Then another detail appeared. A handwritten notation beside the entry referred to an older instruction that classified the bracelet differently from the rest of Diana's private collection. That single line explained how the piece had slipped back into official use. It also proved that the Windsor warning had never been fully enforced. Charles removed his glasses and set the log down. That classification ends tonight. Camilla said nothing. She understood exactly what the decision meant. The bracelet would now be formally separated from anything available for her future use. She had been cleared of deliberately taking it, but the moment still felt like a public and private defeat. William also understood that the records had answered only one question. Camilla had not secretly taken Diana's bracelet, but the damage between them had already happened. The records settled the administrative truth, yet as the palace tried to restart its machinery, the emotional fallout was already moving faster than any official explanation could contain. Nearly an hour after William stopped the banquet, the doors opened again. The guests returned to their places. Glasses were lifted. Formal conversation restarted. But the illusion had been broken. Camilla's wrist was bare. William's expression remained rigid. Charles spoke with the careful calm of a man trying to restore order, while knowing the real damage had happened behind closed doors. The ceremony resumed, but the family seated at its center was no longer pretending nothing had changed. Charles allowed the evening to continue only after the bracelet had been secured and its classification placed under immediate review. A royal wardrobe review, in plain terms, meant checking which pieces could be worn for official duties and which should remain protected from general use. That mattered because the palace could not risk another emotionally charged object appearing by mistake. The guests were given no full explanation. They only knew the banquet had stopped, senior royals had disappeared, and something serious had happened. Camilla returned to her place, carrying the weight of every unanswered glance. She noticed people looking toward the wrist where the bracelet had been, and each look seemed to deepen the humiliation. The queen consort knew the records had cleared her of deliberately taking it, but that truth offered little comfort. In the room that mattered most, she had still been confronted and forced to remove it. William felt no victory. Catherine saw it immediately. The prince sat rigidly through the restarted ceremony, answering only when required, while she understood that the confrontation had reopened grief he usually kept buried. This was why the moment mattered beyond protocol. For him, Diana's possessions were tied to memory, childhood, and the feeling that some parts of his mother should remain untouched by royal politics. Charles quietly made another decision before the evening ended. He ordered every piece with disputed links to Diana removed from general wardrobe access until its history could be reviewed. In a documented internal account, the collections aide also confirmed that William had objected to the bracelet during the earlier Windsor review. The prince had remembered correctly. His warning had been real, recorded, and ignored. Charles rose for the delayed toast and lifted his glass. For one brief moment, his eyes met William's across the table. The king paused, then continued, as though the silence between them meant nothing. But Catherine saw the exchange. So did Camilla. The banquet eventually ended. Camilla entered her private sitting room alone. She removed her earrings, placed them down, and sat without calling for an aide. The evening had begun with ceremony and authority. It ended with her feeling isolated inside the very institution meant to protect her position. William remained unsettled too. Clearing Camilla of deliberate wrongdoing had changed the facts, but it had not repaired the wound. Hours later, with ceremony finished and tempers cooled, the prince and the queen consort would finally meet again without Charles standing between them. And this time, neither could hide behind the bracelet. The second confrontation was nothing like the first. No raised voices, no witnesses, no bracelet between them. William entered knowing the records had shown Camilla did not personally order Diana's jewelry released. Camilla entered knowing that technical innocence did not erase what wearing it had done to him. For perhaps the first time that night, neither had an institution to hide behind. What followed was not reconciliation in the sentimental sense. It was something harder. Two people finally admitting what the object represented. William agreed to the private meeting because the facts had changed. Palace preparations had placed the bracelet in Camilla's hands, meaning she had not secretly removed it from storage herself. That distinction mattered. But so did the emotional truth. Diana's private possessions were not ordinary royal accessories to him. They belonged to a part of his life that existed before titles, duty, and ceremony. Camilla understood that defending procedure alone would only make the distance between them worse. Camilla spoke first. In a documented private account of the conversation, she admitted that she had remembered the Windsor argument only after the bracelet was already on her wrist. She had considered removing it, but fear stopped her. Taking it off before the banquet, she said, would have looked like an admission that she had knowingly done something wrong. So she kept it on. That decision protected her pride for a few hours, and nearly destroyed the evening. William listened without interrupting. Then he told her what she had not understood. Seeing the bracelet on her wrist did not feel like a wardrobe mistake. It felt like someone had erased a boundary around his mother in front of an entire state occasion. The prince admitted that his anger had not been directed only at Camilla. Part of it belonged to Charles, because the king had been warned at Windsor and still allowed the question to remain unresolved. Camilla finally let her own resentment surface. She said she had reacted defensively because history seemed to judge her before anyone asked how the bracelet reached her. Every connection to Diana, she felt, could instantly become an accusation against her. William did not deny the burden of that history, but he told her that understanding it did not mean ignoring what certain possessions represented. Camilla went quiet before giving him the one promise that mattered. "I will never wear it again." William did not celebrate the concession. He told her he did not need an apology for wearing jewelry. He needed certainty that Diana's private possessions would be treated with respect and never casually placed into royal circulation again. That was the turning point. William stopped treating Camilla as the sole cause of the crisis. She stopped treating his anger as simple hostility toward her. They did not leave as friends. They left with something more believable, a boundary finally understood by both sides. But privacy would not protect them for long. Before the palace could shape the narrative, the world noticed the empty wrist, the delayed banquet, and the tension no amount of ceremony could completely disguise. By sunrise, the palace confrontation had become a national spectacle. The public did not have the private conversations, the inventory logs, or the explanation Charles had received. What people had was one unforgettable contrast: Camilla arriving with a bracelet linked to Diana and leaving the formal portion of the evening without it. That single detail was enough. Suddenly, William's decision was being debated not merely as a family dispute, but as a statement about memory, respect, and royal boundaries. William woke to headlines that had already stripped the night of its privacy. News coverage focused on the delayed banquet, his sudden intervention, and the bracelet missing from Camilla's wrist later in the evening. Palace communications, the official statements used to explain royal activity to the public and press, confirmed that an internal jewelry classification review had taken place, but released no private family details. That silence protected the household, yet it also created space for speculation to grow. Catherine watched her husband read the coverage and saw frustration replace the anger of the night before. William hated that a moment tied to his mother had become public entertainment. She urged him not to answer every headline or react to every commentator. The prince understood her point, but he also knew the public now viewed the confrontation as something larger than a banquet dispute. Diana's memory had become the center of the story again. Camilla felt the pressure differently. She had been cleared by the records of deliberately obtaining the bracelet, yet the public debate pulled her back toward the oldest and most painful chapter of her royal life. The Queen Consort understood that explanations about storage and authorization would never carry the same emotional power as the simple fact that she had worn something associated with Diana. Then the palace made the decision permanent. Charles approved a new documented designation for Diana's identified private jewelry. In plain language, the change meant those personal pieces would be clearly separated from items available for official wardrobe use, preventing the same mistake from happening again. The king's approval turned William's demand from one explosive night into lasting household policy. Outside Kensington Palace, the public gave the moment its own meaning. A small crowd gathered near the gates, carrying photographs of Diana. Among the flowers, one woman placed a handwritten card with 5 simple words. Some things belong to memory. A major morning broadcast captured the national mood even more sharply. The banquet restarted. The argument about Diana never truly did. William heard the line later and said nothing. Camilla heard it too, and understood how difficult it would be to separate herself from that history completely. But Charles was preparing one final answer. The headlines could debate blame. The public could debate symbolism. Yet the true meaning of the night would be decided by what the king chose to do with the bracelet itself. And when the cameras moved on, one final private decision would transform the object that caused the confrontation into the symbol that finally closed it. The story ends not with another confrontation, but with a small velvet case. The morning after the palace review is completed, Charles asks William to meet him privately. There is no audience, and no ceremonial announcement. On the table sits the bracelet that stopped a state banquet and reopened wounds stretching back decades. Charles does not defend the mistake that placed it on Camilla's wrist. He does something simpler. He tells his son that Diana's private jewelry will never again be treated as ordinary royal inventory. Charles had already approved the reclassification of Diana's identified personal pieces, meaning those belongings would now be permanently separated from jewelry available for normal royal wardrobe use. The decision mattered because it removed the uncertainty that had allowed the bracelet to appear at the banquet in the first place. It also meant the piece would return to the protected family collection connected to Diana, rather than disappear back into the wider palace system. William listened without interrupting. Then he admitted something difficult. Halting the banquet may have humiliated Camilla, and he knew the confrontation had placed her under enormous pressure. But the prince would not apologize for defending what he believed belonged to his mother's private history. For him, the issue had never been about winning a battle against the Queen Consort. It had been about making sure grief, memory, and family could not be erased by a filing error. Charles accepted that. In a documented private account of their conversation, The king admitted that he should have settled the bracelet question at Windsor months earlier. He had hoped restraint would prevent conflict. Instead, his hesitation allowed uncertainty to survive until it exploded in public. Camilla made her own final decision. In a written confirmation sent to the royal household, she stated that she would not request or wear any jewelry personally identified with Diana. The queen consort had been bruised by the episode, but the records had also cleared her of deliberately taking the bracelet. William accepted that truth. The accusation ended there, even if the emotional boundary remained. Charles closed the velvet case and pushed it toward his son. William placed one hand on it, but did not open it. That choice carried the final meaning of the night. He did not need spectacle. He needed certainty. Later, William told Catherine that protecting Diana's legacy had mattered more than proving anyone guilty. She understood what had changed. The bracelet would remain unworn, protected, and preserved as part of his mother's private legacy, rather than used as another symbol in an old family struggle. The banquet had exposed a failure, but it also forced the monarchy to correct one. Camilla left wounded but cleared. Charles finally imposed the boundary he had avoided. William gained something deeper than victory: recognition that Diana's place inside the family could not simply be reassigned through paperwork, protocol, or convenience. The banquet eventually continued. The palace returned to its routines, and the headlines faded. But one boundary remained permanently changed. Diana's memory would no longer be treated as something anyone could simply wear. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.